I'm Dana Mauriello, and you're listening to This Is a Thing, the podcast where I interview entrepreneurs who started unusual businesses and found success on their own terms. We talk about how they made their wild ideas happen. Today, we're talking to Omar Atia, co-founder of Zero Carb Lyfe. Here's Omar's wild idea: pizza with a crust made entirely of chicken. When I wanted to talk to Omar because as a longtime weightlifter, I've made maximizing protein consumption my job for years. And a pizza made of chicken sounds like a too good to be true joke that you'd see on a bodybuilding thread. But it's real, it's delicious, it's beloved by consumers, and it is a rapidly growing business with products in Target stores around the country. I'm going to talk to Omar about three key decisions in his journey. First, the decision to leave his corporate job in big food. Second, the decision to team up with his co-founder to build Zero Carb Lyfe. And third, the decision to scale with new product categories, retail distribution, and venture capital funding. Enjoy the conversation. You are an engineer, and you started your career in R&D at big food companies, brands that even people like me who are not in the industry have heard of, right? The Conagras, Mondeleses of the world. It was a pretty linear path from your education to your first job to continuous promotions. And I've heard you say that at some point you felt like you had golden handcuffs and you needed to get out. Tell me about that day when you started to feel like, I think I got to get off this ride and do something else.
There were probably a few days that, intermittent throughout that career because I've been entrepreneurial since I was a child. I think I decided to sell candy bars at school as a side hustle when I was 7 or 8. And that's actually kind of what carried me and made the golden handcuffs thicker and thicker, is because you do get rewarded at some level when you're entrepreneurial at work, because you are proactive. You look for what are unique ways to solve problems, what are ways you can lead people to solve problems. So that is very beneficial and gets you a lot of reward, promotion, increase in salary, bonuses. So it becomes hard, especially, my family was growing. I had 3 children by this time. And I had started a couple of side hustles. One of them was actually a virtual language learning business back in 2009.
So you were doing side hustles on the side of your full-time job. Was your aspiration to quit your job and make one of those a full-time venture at the time?
Absolutely. So I've always had a side hustle. I had a Moroccan restaurant that I opened with a partner when I was full-time at P&G. I partnered with someone to have a small car dealership when I was with Integrin. And so I always had something. And then I realized I really needed to be in a growth startup mode. And that's when I started the language learning startup.
When I think about golden handcuffs, I think about having a salary that you start to depend on and expenses that need to be covered by that salary. So how did you think about cutting that cord and building the confidence that that was going to work for you, both from an kind of emotional and motivation point of view, which I know is really important to you, but also just practically with your growing family?
The time I took that real risk was in 2014 when I left the corporate America for good and then started the consulting company. When I left, it was all risk because it was all dependent on, we had a few clients at the time. I had a small team, and then I left to be able to grow that team and to be able to grow the clients, because I genuinely believe that there's so much to be done for people to be more innovative and to think more innovatively to solve problems.
So how did you evaluate that decision and become confident that it was the right step for you?
The way I made the decision, candidly, was a little bit of financial projections on the consulting company based on what it was doing at the time and based on what we can do more with my presence as CEO, as well as, prayer and believing in oneself and having the support of family and saying, hey, if you don't do it now, you'll never do it. Because at the time I was now 31, 32, I had accomplished a lot in the corporate world. I became the youngest plant manager of all the plant managers and all the associations I knew. For a big corporate company in manufacturing, I had accomplished a lot, and I felt if I didn't do it now, the golden handcuffs would just get thicker and thicker, and it would just be impossible to do.
That's right. The opportunity cost just increases and increases and makes it
Absolutely.
harder. You said that you were doing forecasts, and it sounds like you weren't forecasting from zero. Were you already doing this as a side hustle, so you had some data that you could forecast against?
Yeah, there was a small team that I was advising, and so they were taking some of the know-how that I had developed and doing consulting with it. And so it was based on that one big client came and they were like, "Hey, now's the time. We need you full time," kind of thing. Me and my partner and the few people that were with him. So I kind of had to make a decision of no, go get someone else, and we can get someone just as talented as I, or now is the moment that I can actually make that leap. And that's actually
Yeah.
how I recommend it to entrepreneurs. A lot of people have ideas, have what they believe could make a business, and they take the plunge. And I'm not against that. However, I always believe in do a test market first, do a proof of concept first. Make sure you have something that you can actually project based on. Don't project on just hope.
Yes, that is such good advice. I've talked to other entrepreneurs about the side hustle slide, starting
That's
as the
right.
side hustle,
That's
building
right.
confidence through that
Absolutely.
before you quit. So now we're at the point in your story. We talked about the decision to quit your day job, one of the biggest decisions most entrepreneurs make in their lives. And now you are full-time running ThoughtFire, your innovation consultancy, and you meet your current business partner while you're there. You meet Mohammed. And I understand that Mohammed was a former accountant. He's a diabetic. Chicken crust pizza that he could enjoy. I imagine that in your innovation consultancy, you met a lot of entrepreneurs and they had a lot of ideas, but you didn't launch with them. You launched with Mohammed. So what was special about meeting Mohammed that made you think this is the one, this is what I want to do?
Well, I had a lot of experience in foods, and what he had invented, he wasn't able to scale alone because he invented it on a kitchen level, kitchen top, and he was doing it in restaurant level. And so he didn't necessarily see how he could do it at scale because it was all kitchen top. And I knew from my business and foods experience that once you start shipping, once you start going through the supply chain, it would not hold up. We would have to develop a process. And I had the blessing of having developed and gotten a patented craft that's understanding how time and temperature relate to how it can manipulate ingredients. So that knowledge base that I had was a perfect fit for what he was developing because once he told me there was no binder, I knew that we could potentially develop a lot of products around that with my knowledge base coupled with that initial idea that he had and develop more product forms even. And that's what we did. We got one more patent and then secured three patents pending that are likely to go through here shortly. And all of that was based on using my knowledge to complement his. So I could see the fit of my knowledge base complementing his. I could also candidly see at that moment that this was an opportunity to really transform health with food, which had been a passion of mine since the beginning being in food.
And this sounds like it could not have been a more perfect fit for your experience, your expertise, what you're passionate about. You talked about how it's smart for entrepreneurs to test something before they go in and take a leap with both feet. In this case, how did you test first kind of on the personal side that you and Mohammed would be great co-founders to work on this together, and then the business side that you thought this was something that was worth spending your time and attention on?
Well, first, as an inventor, he really was exactly that. He was not a, and he admittedly says this. He was not necessarily a business leader. He was a creative, and I've seen it time and time again that you have creatives who don't know their limitations and they try to
Mm.
launch a business and it fails because they have to have business leadership. They have to have business acumen. You have to make decisions that are sometimes hurt your ego because you realize that the market's telling you, hey, that amazing idea you came up with isn't necessarily how it's actually going to win in the market. Only a few people want it and you can't scale it. Or it's not scalable from a process standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint. So but he had this personality where he recognized his limitation. He knew he was a creative and he wanted to stay a creative. And so he knew that he needed a partner that could then lead a business and develop. And then he also saw that I had that vision to develop more around it. It was all about complementing one another.
And did you do anything to test your chemistry before committing to the partnership?
The way we launched Zero Carb Life is that I followed the exact same process that I consulted with a ton of companies to do. Start with a proof of concept, prove it out first, then go into a test market, prove that out. And so we did it that way. And before full commitment to, of myself taking a big chunk of capital and a big chunk of consulting time that I would otherwise be earning revenue from, as well as him moving to where we were headquartered, we did the test market and did the proof of concept. Once it was clear that this is something, and one other thing happened in the middle of that, which was COVID hit, and
Mm.
all our consulting clients shut down their revenue. So that made it a little bit easier to then focus a lot more. And so I brought actually quite a few people from the consulting company to be the initial startup team for Zero Carb Life. And then that's what helped us really grow rapidly. And at the same time, people were getting very used to ordering food online. So it ended up being a wonderful initial year for us. We commercialized well and found the right partner to commercialize with and continued building that innovation. And we also then found a way to do e-commerce, which gave us a ton of feedback from the market, which helped us then launch into restaurants with our crust. And so we had an initial product, we had 2 channels that we were selling in, and it was a great start to the business.
So I hear 2 things in that. So one, your proof of concept was a proof of concept of demand and business viability, but also a proof of concept of your working relationship with Mohammed, which is a great bang for your buck of a proof of concept test. And I also hear in that part of the decision making is about right time, which I can't name an entrepreneur I haven't heard that from in some fashion, that there are things outside of your control that make the time right. For you, it was COVID and consulting clients drying up a bit. So it was less of an opportunity cost to kind of go back to that theme.
That's right.
To jump on this new venture. Now, you mentioned proof of concept. I'm so eager to hear, how did you go about testing demand in an efficient way to build confidence in the business viability?
My immediate vision for how we sell the products is food service. It's a crust that you make a pizza on. My thought process is, well, the first client for this should be pizza restaurants because they don't have to develop their own. They can just get a protein crust and make pizza on it. And so it started really reaching out to pizza restaurant owners and within my network. And we were able to get one that had an 11 restaurant chain to be the very first customer. And I was very candid with them. I said, look, we'll develop this with your feedback. We'd like you guys to be the test market. And so that's the value you're getting out of this. And we'll give you the absolute best pricing of anyone ever because you'll be grandfathered into the best pricing. And so that's what we did is we tested with that restaurant chain. And then we also did focus groups. And then we started selling on a very small scale e-commerce to test our logistics and everything else. And tested different 3 third-party logistics companies to see which one would be best for us. There's not a ton, by the way, of cold chain third-party logistics because frozen is a very difficult thing to send to customers and to distribute. But we did that. We then got a good look at our numbers, at our finances. We got a good look at our at the test market, and the results were wildly successful. We were now making revenue 5 months into the company, and the growth curve was very optimistic. We started leveraging some influencers to try our product, and when they liked it, they marketed it. So that helped us boost sales quite a bit as well. So it became, we had this initial engine that really was more of a learning. And that's what I recommend to everyone when they start up a business. Look at it as just like you would a science experiment at school, but just on a bigger scale with a little bit more skin in the game. And as long as you treat it like that, this is a test, and I'm testing constantly, learning from it, and I'm testing so that I can then have a business that's really successful to scale. If you go into the very first months thinking I have a business to scale, you're going to be punched in the gut quite a few times, and you're going to be disappointed or disappoint your leadership because you have to be ready that I'm learning to iterate, I'm learning to iterate, I'm learning to iterate.
That is tremendous advice. It sounds like you're getting a lot of data that is very positive, but I'm curious, was there a moment when you looked at a particular piece of that data maybe and said, oh, wow, this is really working?
There was one piece that said we're on to something, and there was also one piece that was very risky and very scary. So the one piece that was clear that we were on to something was the feedback we were getting from customers. There was an example of a mother who actually left a recording on our company line, which was very unusual for the time. And she left a recording basically to convey her emotion about how happy she was. And she actually was sobbing because she had a daughter with celiac disease. And her daughter was constantly telling her that whenever there would be pizza parties, she could never eat with everyone else, and it would be awkward for her. And then they held the first pizza party with our pizza. Everybody loved it. And her daughter felt, brilliantly happy. And so this was like a moving moment for us. We got comments about people that didn't have dietary concern, but wanted to have more protein in their diet for fitness reasons. They were extremely happy. That were diabetics were taking videos of their blood sugar monitor, and their blood sugar was going down instead of up after they ate our pizza. So these were things that were like wild validations that we never imagined. So this was a huge thing that was saying, you know what, we're on to something, we should scale this. The thing that was very scary was the cold chain costs. Being able to ship frozen to customers was insanely costly. And so we knew we had to get very innovative to be able to still maintain a lot of our margin.
What I hear is unsolicited extreme positive feedback from users. And there's such a big difference if somebody fills out a survey that you send them and checks a box versus someone is calling your line, right? That is a lot of friction for them to do that, a lot of motivation. So I can understand how that would have been so exciting. The cold chain issue also makes a lot of sense as well. Like, how do you make the economics actually work? How did you make that not the blocker that made you abandon this, but how did you work through that issue?
Well, we first got very, very detailed with the data to understand by region, and a lot of this, honestly, we were helped by the third party provider, but we told them, look, this isn't going to work if it's just a general average and we don't understand where and when and what season, et cetera, because all of that affects it. So we had to work with all of that and understand it at a very deep level, and then put together a plan that was much more sophisticated. And then we realized that we needed to do another search for third-party providers because now we had sort of new criteria. So we started doing that, and that's how we ended up with this partner that we have now.
So we've talked about the decision to quit your job. We just talked about the decision to start Zero Carb Lyfe and build this. So the third decision that I want to talk about is your decision of how you would scale this business. So this business started in pizza shops, as you said. You have scaled through frozen consumer packaged goods and getting venture capital funding, which is pretty rare for a CPG product. I want to understand that decision to scale.
So we were selling the crust very early on, e-commerce, and getting a lot of comments, and people were showing us the products they were making with it. So they weren't just making pizza. Some were making tortillas, quesadillas, breakfast burritos, because it also works very well as a tortilla. So that was telling us that we need to grow the volume. There's a lot of use cases for this. So we started to advertise the use cases for the crust and sell more of that. And then we realized we could sell that retail. But then we got feedback from the market that retail, people are looking much more for ready-to-make food. And so that's when we realized, okay, we need to really speed up our frozen pizza development. Long story is, we realized that from the market. All of it is signal from the market. And you have to be able to tell the signal from the noise, because you're going to get some noise from the market as well. You'll get one client saying, oh, it'd be great if you can make this for us. Don't immediately jump in and say that the market wants this. When you say the market, you have to have a critical threshold of feedback to call it signal from the market.
It sounds like the decision to focus your energy on frozen through both direct-to-consumer and retail channels was you were getting the feedback, but you were getting the signal from that feedback that this was where the demand was, and you had the expertise to figure out all the logistical issues to make that possible. So then in those channels, you decided to expand with VC funding, among other sources, to be able to fuel this growth. How did you decide that that was the right financial path for you?
It became very clear when we were needing to scale, and every time we put fuel on the fire, we would grow more. And then there was only so much we could do with the return that was coming back to us. So we realized that, look, this has the opportunity to be one of those big growth startups that we could exit, and it could be great for everyone. And so we went and pitched that to initially just a group of small friends and family, and that gave us a good boost. And then we realized we needed to do more, because we not only wanted to launch frozen pizza, we also realized that one thing that we learned in e-commerce is the more products you have when people come to your site, the more return on ad spend that you have, which is the more return on investment. So you want them to see a plethora. And once you have that captive audience that are looking for these types of products, the more you can show them that meet that mission, meet that criteria, the more likely they are to have an average order value that's much higher. So we realized that we want to bring in more products, but then we made the decision, look, the additional products we bring in, we need to make them ambient, not frozen, because this consistent frozen logistics costs, we need to offset it a little bit. So that's when we started thinking about chips and taco shells and pasta. And so we decided to launch chips because that was a very clear high use case, easier to sell because there's many more facilities and places on, in terms of distribution that could take it. You can't sell frozen pizza anywhere except if they have a freezer, whereas chips you can sell really anywhere. And so we needed growth for the R&D of it, and we needed growth for the further selling of frozen pizza. So we went to VC. We were very successful. We've actually oversubscribed every round that we went to raise. There's a very clear signal to the capital markets in our business that, look, every time we put money into this, it grows better. And every time we put money into this, we are very disciplined about leveraging the signal from the market, as well as disciplined about how we use our money. When you look at our books, our burn rate compared to our revenue is wildly disciplined compared to a typical growth startup.
So you have proven that you're good operators. You could go in with that data, and you have done the hard work of building that track record that you could bring into those conversations. So I want to close here. It's clear that you have so much expertise in this area. You started a business in a place where you truly were already expert and are becoming more expert all the time. But I imagine even for you, there were some surprises. What is the biggest surprise that you faced on this journey so far?
Just the amount of pressure and the amount of realization of pivots that you need to make and the amount of potential gut punches that you feel even while you're winning. So, it's funny because my wife the other day was saying this to me. She was saying, when you talk to me about some of the pain points you're feeling, I feel like, oh my gosh, why is he even running this business? And then when I hear you talking about the actual wins you guys have, it's like, why is he even complaining? And so I told her, well, that's the exact life of the entrepreneur. When you have aspirations and that's what you're driving for, anything that sort of stands in the way of the aspiration feels like a gut punch to you. But if you don't realize that that is exactly what the startup journey is, it's just a bunch of and they don't become gut punches anymore. They just, they're just learning moments. The very first time I realized this cold chain issue, I was like, oh no, is this the death of our business? And it wasn't even close. It was just a challenge. We actually spun it, became an opportunity, made us realize we could actually be a company that brings in products that others aren't able to. Others were coming to us. Would you be willing to bring our product to your platform? So it became an opportunity, but initially you think this is killing me. And don't assume the solution you have going in, even the solution, which is the product itself, don't assume that that's the right solution. If you're committed to the problem that you're solving, keep pivoting and keep iterating, and you'll get to the success point sooner or later, as long as there's persistence and as long as there's innovation.
And it sounds like you have taken your own advice. You have pivoted quite a bit in your business. You've pivoted in logistics that work for you. You've pivoted channels, products. What is next for Zero Carb Lyfe?
Our outlook is we are trying to get to the exit candidly within 30 months. We're 6 years in now. We really believe we can get there. We believe that we're going to expand significantly on this retail success that we've had getting our product into Target, because we have a clear visibility as to what is driving velocity, not just first time purchase, but what will get us repeat purchase, because we have all that data from e-commerce. So we just need to be very disciplined about quality, hold accountability to the manufacturing side, which I have a say in now because I'm also partly having some control because I have some ownership in it. We are very choosy about when to grow into a new variety before we do a new product, because you want to saturate the market with something that's continuing to work. When you're a growth startup, there's no reason to just try to compete in something else when you're competing very well in one thing. It doesn't mean those product forms won't make their way to the market. I don't know if they'll make their way before we exit, but they will make their way because they're amazing products and we know that. But it's just making the right decisions, getting us to that exit in 30 months. That's kind of Omar's call to action and sort of living mission right now, because I believe that's what I owe to our investors and to our employees.
Well, it sounds like as consumers, there's some things we'll see, some new products on the shelf perhaps, and there's some things we won't see, some logistical things you're doing behind the scenes to make this happen. So Omar, I want to end on that note. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was Omar Atia talking about his journey building Zero Carb Lyfe. Here are my favorite 3 takeaways from that episode. First, making side hustles a practice. When Omar was 7 or 8, he was selling candy bars in a schoolyard. When he started working full time, he'd never stopped his side hustles. He ran a virtual language learning platform on the side. He balanced his work with running a car wash, a Moroccan restaurant. Starting new ventures is a practice, a muscle that he was continuously building. Not only the skill, but the confidence that he could run something, and that the knowledge that there are a plethora of ideas that he could pursue. And the side hustles are a good way to test an idea before jumping in with both feet and quitting his day job. The side hustles gave him data that he could use to build projections against and forecast the potential of the business. I really liked this quote: "Don't project on hope, project on data." Second, find a partner that complements you. When Omar met Mohammed, Mohammed had the initial idea for the business, and he had built the early products, but he didn't have the expertise to scale the business. Omar came in with exactly that complementary skill set and expertise that was needed. It's such a good example about finding complementary partners and how the initial product idea for a business and the strategy and skill required to scale it might be 2 very different things. One person could have both skills, or it could come from a team effort. Third, test always. Before committing to Zero Carb Lyfe, Omar and Mohammed worked together on a proof of concept. It was a proof of concept of their partnership, as well as a proof of concept on the viability of the business. The most compelling data they got in those early tests was unsolicited positive feedback with very high emotion. Customers that were actually calling into the business to rave and cry about how much they love the product. That's when you know you are truly meeting an intense need. And Omar was analytical about this feedback. He didn't just let one person's rave review sway him, but he listened for signal and pattern from the customer feedback to build his confidence. And even after Omar and Mohammed were satisfied with the results of their proof of concept and proving the potential of the business, and they had jumped in with both feet, they still kept testing. They never stopped. They started by selling their product through pizza shops. They could talk to those owners and visit the shops and get feedback on the product consistently as they were developing it in the early days. They repeatedly were testing. Omar talked about how at every step of the way in building this business, the steps he took were for the purposes of learning and iterating. Now, if you are curious to taste chicken crust pizza, and I don't know how you could not be at this point in all of Omar's other products, you can buy Zero Carb Lyfe products on their website or in Target stores, and I will drop their website and store locator in the show notes. This is Dana Mauriello, and I can't wait to see you next week on This Is a Thing.